So by now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this story of Joe Kent, the counterterrorism official who resigned in this big letter, essentially saying it's not in America's interest to go to war with Iran. It's really the Jews who have made us do this. Clearly, he's thinking in very ideological terms. He's one of the Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens types, jumped onto their show, into Tucker's show immediately after resigning. It now turns out, actually, he was already under FBI investigation for leaking before this. It also turns out that he had very different views just months ago, saying that Iran was an imminent threat. But Mark Levin, as always, breaks this down in ways that only he is able to because he has very close access to the White House and the administration and knows the people involved. Also, another thing that Mark mentions that's fascinating is that he had a run-in with Joe Kent and realised that Kent was deliberately, it looks like, leaking a private meeting that he had with Trump, that Levin had with Trump, and twisting it into somehow Levin lobbying for the Iran war, when actually Trump was the one that initiated the meeting. And Levin talks about that as well in this conversation, in this monologue that he delivers. Also, by the way, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. Please like our videos, comment, hype our videos. All these things really help us to spread the word, get into the algorithm, and grow this channel. Thank you.
Once you decide that your position cannot comport or support the president's position, for whatever the reason, you have an obligation to leave, because the president has no obligation to follow your lead. He was elected. You were appointed, and he may barely even know you. You're gathering intelligence information for the President of the United States so he can evaluate it, make a decision, and act on it. He's made clear over a course of month after month after month after month, negotiation after negotiation after negotiation, what he was willing to do and not willing to do with Iran. And he had a red line on nuclear weapons. So the Democrats are arguing, well, the threat wasn't imminent. The Democrats are looking for ways to sabotage the military campaign and the commander-in-chief. The Democrats are looking for a way to exploit the situation. They have absolutely no plan on what to do about this. They had a president, Obama. His idea was, let me give the enemy billions and a 10-year runway to build nuclear weapons. Well, that's a disaster, and Trump said, no, we're not doing that, thank God. Then we have Biden, who stepped in, basically reintroduced it informally, the Obama plan, and gave them over $100 billion. How? By lifting sanctions on the regime so they could continue to sell oil, the vast majority of which they were selling to communist China. Donald Trump said no. He campaigned on no nukes. It was not a surprise. He campaigned on peace through strength, not on Fortress America, not on isolationism. He could not have been clearer. When Mr. Kent was appointed, he was well aware of all of this. Mr. Kent himself, when he was running for office, stated virtually the same thing the president had stated.
Yep.
Something changed. Something which is really inexplicable happened. You have an obligation, an ethical obligation, to then separate yourself from the situation, particularly when you're in that significant of a position. The reporting yesterday is the man was a leaker. You can't have somebody who's leaking who's in a significant intelligence position, who has access to the most classified of classified information. You can't do that. Look, I worked in the Reagan administration for 8 years. I was chief of staff to the Attorney General. The kind of information that crossed my desk, your eyes would pop out of your head. I have never discussed it. I've never discussed it with a reporter. I only discussed it with the people who are cleared to see it and discuss it, including the Attorney General of the United States. I've never written about my time with the Attorney General of the United States. I've never discussed any of our confidential meetings, let alone classified meetings. None of it. None of it. And yet I find these people do this all the time. How are we supposed to run a government? How is a president supposed to be president when top advisors conduct themselves this way. So that resignation letter, I encourage you to read it. If you're MAGA, if you're a constitutional conservative, if you're an ethical and moral person, I think you'll be very offended by it. He says there's no imminent threat. I wish these people would define what they mean by imminent threat. When Steve Witkoff comes back as a negotiator and says, Mr. President, they have said to us, in 10 days they will have 11 nuclear weapons. They won't negotiate. They won't give them up. They won't give them to a third party. Oh, and by the way, they have 22 tons of nuclear material, and it's clear that after 6 weeks, they're going to have 25 nuclear weapons and thousands of more ballistic missiles, which are a massive problem. They're a massive problem for our bases in the area, a massive problem for our allies, Israel and the Arab states, and a NATO country, Turkey, and another NATO country, Greece, for all of Europe. And so the president's got this information. And he says, my God, in 3 months, they'll have 10,000 more ballistic missiles. They'll have 25 nuclear weapons. They're telling us in 10 days they're going to have nuclear weapons. After all this time, the months gone by, June, having slammed those sites, having bombed those sites, they were back at it. And on top of that, they'd slaughtered about 50,000 of their own people in 2 days. And the president was so repulsed by that, he said at the time, help is coming. Help is coming. It's not imminent? Well, then what's imminent? Is imminent 9/11? You have to be hit before you act? Is imminent Pearl Harbor? You have to be hit before you act? You know, I did my monologue on Fox on Sunday about what FDR said in a fireside chat. I believe it was August 1940. He was having the same problem. You had these isolationists who were ignoring everything that Hitler was doing, Tojo was doing, ignoring it all. And he was saying to the American people, we have people in our country who are putting the sheets over their heads when they go to bed, who don't want to see what's happening, don't want to hear what these people are saying. The difference is Germany and Japan and Italy had not attacked us yet. Iran has attacked us so many times I can't even count it over the last 47 years, including trying to assassinate our president, including killing almost 250 Marines in their barrack, including killing almost 1,000 of our military in Iraq and maiming thousands of others, attacking 2 of our embassies directly and through surrogates, and the list goes on and on and on. They've attacked us. They're at war with us. And they tell us, we get nuclear weapons, we're going to use them against you. And why wouldn't they? They just killed 50,000 of their own people. They would have killed 1 million of their own people. But the point is, you're president of the United States. You have to make these decisions. You're the commander-in-chief. Your people come to you and they give you this information. You're supposed to ignore it? What was he supposed to do with it? Try and buy them off like Obama? That didn't work. Try to buy them off like Biden? That obviously didn't work. And if you understand, and we do here, the mentality of this regime, that it is a 7th century, primitive, barbaric mentality that says that the Quran compels them to destroy all obstacles to the coming of their Messiah. And what does that mean? All Jews, all Christians, all Hindus, all Buddhists, everybody, including fellow Muslims who are minding their own business, who don't embrace that kind of fundamentalist terrorism. There are books written about this, not just by Westerners analyzing it, books written, essays written, sermons given by imams and Islamist scholars, so-called. They're telling us what they're going to do. So you're president of the United States and you're supposed to say, all right, it's nuclear weapons. Let me send Witkoff over there and Kushner over there, let's negotiate a peace. There is no peace. As Jefferson said with the Barbary pirates, who were Muslims, in the northern coast of Africa, when they were enslaving and killing Americans who were on ships, freighters. He said, there's no negotiating with this. It's a different ideology. People have tried. And our first war was the Barbary Pirates' War. During the
Crazy
Jefferson
that happened at the start of American history.
What this man put in his letter is the usual hate and bigotry. First of all, he said he disagreed with the president. It wasn't imminent. He doesn't really explain himself. But I don't know what they mean by imminent if that's not imminent. You know, at the point of a gun or a point of a nuclear weapon? That's number one. Number two, he blames Israel. Israel pressured the President of the United States to go to war. The President has said repeatedly that's not the case, that in fact he pressured Israel on the timing of the war. But they don't want to believe him. Israel is a great ally. They're fighting alongside us. Look at the British, look at the French, look at the Spanish. They're doing nothing.
And I might add, America, I would say, gets exceptional, incomparable value for money in a few billions of dollars worth of aid each year, which Israel, I believe rightly, is weaning itself off for all kinds of important reasons. But just as a side note, I don't think any other intelligence service is able and military could be able to do in the region what Israel does. I think America would have to pay 10 times the amount, 100 times the amount, God knows, to be able to replicate what Israel's doing in that part of the world.
Effectively nothing except undermining us. They're fighting right next to us. Well, that's because they have their own interests. No, we have shared interests. That's the point of an alliance. Two democracies that want to destroy the nuclear capability and the intercontinental ballistic missile capability of the enemy. But from 1979 to today, Iran has attacked us, having nothing to do with Israel. Iran has attacked the United States. It took our people hostage. It kills our people. It's blown up buses. It has done all these things. Apart from Israel, if Israel didn't even exist, that doesn't change their interpretation of the Quran. That doesn't change their ideology. That doesn't change their desire for intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're not called regional missiles. They're called intercontinental, one continent to the next. And Joe Kent thought he knew better than the president, even though he had the same position as the president not long ago. He's accused of leaking. And I know exactly one case in which he leaked. And then I want to get to the Bill of Rights. Mine. The President of the United States watched a show of mine in May on Life, Liberty, and Levin, and I talked about Iran and what I thought should be done. I was concerned that the clock was ticking. He asked to see me. I couldn't see him. I had to leave town. My brother was quite ill. He said, when you come back, I would like to see you. I said, well, of course. So when I came back, I saw him. And I was in the Oval Office, and we went to the ante room, and there were a few people there. We were there for an hour and a half or so. I won't discuss what happened in the meeting. And I left. One of the people in the Oval Office when I left, there were several, I now have learned was Joe Kent. No sooner did I get back to my office than Tucker Carlson had written some horrendous screed on the internet. I barely know Tucker Carlson. He says, oh, my Fox colleague. I barely know the man. I've never had a meal with the man. I've never had a social event with the man. I've never spent more than 3-4 minutes with the guy. And then, oh, his Fox colleague. Not a colleague. I don't even know him, really. And you can read all this. It was put on a website. That Levin is there lobbying for war, and that Israel's this, and the Jewish lobby's that, and we're going to have World War III, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers are going to die, and Levin's pulling together a lobbying group of individuals. I wasn't pulling together anything. And the president knows I wasn't pulling together, and he asked to see me. I try not to bother him. So I know. Where did that come from? The vice president's office said it wasn't us. But I happen to know now that it was Joe Kent, last June, who contacted his buddy Carlson. I know firsthand, that's one example. A president can't tolerate that sort of thing. And somebody who does that to a president, when he meets with somebody, it leaks to a podcaster. That's intolerable. That's unethical. Somebody may have the greatest military service ever. And apparently his is very good and strong. And so I don't question that. You know, we honor people who serve in the military. That's a big deal. And he's got multiple Bronze Stars and so forth. That's not the issue. The issue is that doesn't give you immunity from your next job, your next service as a civilian, and one of the highest positions in intelligence. You're serving the president, not yourself, not your own ambitions, not your own principles, not your own viewpoints, not whatever you're serving. And to leak? That is unacceptable. And there have been a ton of leaks out of this administration, to Axios, to Politico, to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, all the left-wing sites. And Tucker has a history of this. I think it was back in 2021. He was caught leaking to the media against his friends and colleagues. And I remember I was contacted about it, and I commented on it and denounced it. He's got a history of this problem. But that's about all I want to say about it right now. There'll be more later. I want to get to the Bill of Rights.
That's really, really interesting from Mark Levin. It's he seems to have a little bit of first-hand experience in Joe Kent leaking, which makes this whole story, it just takes it to a whole separate level. What does seem clear to me is there is, in some ways, one of the people that comes to mind when I see what's happening here with Joe Kent. There's a history of leaking, but then he suddenly does this big resignation letter before this starts. This story of the FBI investigating him for leaking comes out. He tries to redirect everything about, oh, it's Israel getting us into this, a big letter, jumps onto Tucker Carlson's show. Meanwhile, just months prior, he was waving the warning flag about Iran, claims that Israel was responsible for the tragic death of his wife, whereas it was actually Islamist terrorists. And honestly, when I look at this, the person that I think of is Megyn Kelly. Because it seems to me that her seeming stance shift is also not coming from a principled ideological place, and more just from a place of expediency. What will get the most views? Which way is the wind blowing? It looks like pandering to the groypers and all of that is the way to go. Look, I don't know what's in anyone's heart, but my sense is more with like Candace and Tucker, or certainly Tucker, I think he is more believing of what he says, of his delusions and his Jew hatred and ultra isolationism and siding with anti-American, anti-Western despots. But in the case of Megyn Kelly and then Joe Kent, to me it just seems in some ways even more cynical and just pragmatic rather than based on principles. And that's very sad. But as Mark Levin rightly points out, we are seeing from so many sources of authority, whether it's the Speaker of the House, whether it's from the President's office, the Vice President, national security heads, that is clear the threat of Iran was not just imminent, but even if it wasn't next day, even if it wasn't the case, even if it wasn't in the next 10 days that they'd have a nuke, that's what they were trying to go back towards, rebuilding, and this cycle would happen again and again and again. And we know they're building up their stockpiles of ballistic missiles. We know that they're interested in creating nukes, and not just as a way to protect themselves from wars, from people that want to destroy the regime, but because they actively believe in bringing about the apocalypse. And if not now, when Iran was weakened after the 12-day war, if not now, after the 40,000 or so estimated civilians gunned down indiscriminately, it still shocks me. It's still insane to me. Yet there were no widespread protests on the streets of Western capitals for that, but there was when Israel fights such a just war with an incomparably low combatant to non-combatant ratio. But putting all that to one side, if not now, when? Now is the chance to go for it. And Trump could see if we don't do this, then we're not just kicking the can down the road, we're guaranteeing Iran's tyranny spreading its tentacles further and wider than ever before, and that simply cannot be allowed to happen. We have to put an end to this. And so far from everyone calling what Trump did and Netanyahu did an escalation, actually I think going to war sides is a de-escalation. Not doing anything is the escalation, actually, ironically. Now, before we finish, I just have to mention to you that one of the great lies that Tucker and Candace and others push is that Zionism and Judaism are separate. So I'm not against the Jews or Judaism, it's the Zionists I have a problem with. This is a bogus lie. And our new documentary, Zionism and Judaism, The False Separation, unpacks this all for you. Have a watch of the trailer. And if you want to watch the full thing on JTV+, just click on the link below in the video description. I'm not against Judaism, I'm just against Zionism.
It's not Jewish, it's Zionism.
Judaism and Zionism are completely separate.
You know, Judaism is a faith, Israel is a state.
You can be Jewish without being a Zionist.
Zionism and Judaism is totally diametrically opposed.
I'm sure you've heard this before, from protesters, from politicians, from even well-meaning people trying to navigate the Israel-Palestine debate. But I'm here to tell you that this separation is complete nonsense. It's a comfortable lie. The kind of lie that sounds intelligent but collapses the moment you actually open this book, the Torah, the Bible, and study Judaism on its own terms. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to tackle this myth head on. We'll actually look inside the Torah and see how in the very first book, Genesis, there's no mention of law or religion. It's all centered on the promise of a specific land to a specific nation. We'll trace how Judaism, not modern politics, but Judaism itself, is structured around one obsessive, relentless, undeniable claim: the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. We'll reveal why the building of a nation in the land of Israel is an indispensable part of the project of Judaism. Why Judaism is not a religion, it's the divine project of a nation in a land. We'll discover how the Torah preemptively answered the colonization accusation that wouldn't fully materialize for another 3,000 years. We'll explore why, if the land is so central, Jews had to spend thousands of years in global exile. We'll unpack what Zionism actually means, and how anti-Zionism doesn't just contradict Israeli policy, it contradicts the fundamental architecture of Judaism itself. For some people, this is going to be uncomfortable viewing, but by the end, we'll prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Judaism and Zionism are inseparable. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.